Today, we had the pleasure of sitting down with Frank Wooten, the founder of Vence, which is now part of Merck Animal Health. Vence is a virtual fencing system developed for rotational cattle grazing and livestock management. We learned a lot and hope you enjoy. In Our Expert Opinion podcast is brought to you by SVN Saunders Ralston Danzler Real Estate, a full-service land and commercial brokerage with over $4 billion in transactions since 1996.
Okay, welcome back to In Our Expert Opinion podcast. I'm excited as always if I get to have my co-host on camera, which is not very often. So hello to Chad.
Here I am.
And then we've got Precious Eli running sound and video and saving us all from ourselves, I guess. I had no idea how this was going to be set up, so thank God he's in studio with us. And
thanks for figuring it all out for us, Eli.
Because I
appreciate you.
Chad was sitting in your seat, Eli, and I asked him, I said, how, like, my laptop, how's it going to work? And Chad was like, don't know. I'm like, okay, cool. So
that's why they pay me the big bucks.
I know. It should be in our incompetent opinion for Chad and I.
No, it's about our guests' opinions. And they are the experts. We've actually got one on with us on the line virtually.
Oh boy, you're setting the bar high just even before I even get to weigh in here. All right.
You know what? Just fake it till you make it. You got it. You just let everybody know.
Expert, professional, whatever,
Yeah.
Amateur.
But we have got Frank Wooten on the computer. I want to say the computer.
Live.
Yeah.
Not on live.
Yeah. And you have a company that I didn't even know existed, Frank, but I'm very interested in it. And I think that a lot of our land guys are going to be interested in it as well. And your company is called Vence, Vence.
Virtual fencing. Yep.
Yes.
And you were along with a lot of people in not knowing that exists as something out there on the planet.
Now, when I told Chad that it was virtual fencing, I think he assumed it was like the sword fencing.
There may have been a little exaggeration there of what I actually thought it was. I knew what it was, and I like to make a joke about most everything.
Now you've given me my real concept for the virtual background that I need to figure out. I need to have fencing attire.
That is so funny. You should. You absolutely should. Or you should start taking fencing courses or classes, so that way you can say that you're an expert fencer. And
what was it? It was Zuckerberg was wearing the glasses in the metaverse, and he was golfing or something with somebody, and somebody. Was it Michael? Was like they're fencing virtually in the metaverse?
Yes.
And I was I don't think that's
virtual fencing. So since we don't know what it is, we would like to hear about your business and maybe a little bit of your background and kind of how you got into this. For everybody listening and watching, it is not a sport. It is a tool used, I believe, to keep things in an area you would like to keep them in.
That's a good broad way to describe it. So I'll start. My background actually. I always laugh when people call me an expert because my background, as of 7.5, almost 8 years ago, I really had only been on ranches to go to dude ranches and don't come from a ranching background or a livestock background, although I kind of wish I did in many ways after having spent the last 8 years in the industry. I was approached via some colleagues of mine to kind of talk out this really crazy idea 8 years ago of putting collars on cattle to keep them out of places and to remove the need for physical fencing on ranches, as well as to be able to move cattle around. I happened to be just at this spot in my life where I had a little bit of extra time to dive in and dig in on the problem set. Prior to that, my entire experience, I spent about 12 years in finance on the investment side, and I initially was looking at this as an investment concept. And so one of the interesting things that happened is I approached it simply like an investment, not like a company that I was going to run or start. And gave me this great opportunity to learn about an industry that I really had limited insight into, other than enjoying the products of the land, so to speak. And what became really interesting to me over time was that a cattle ranch is a grass factory, and cattle, whether in dairy or whether they're raised in a cow-calf operation or at an end production state, are just the means in which that protein, that grass, is translated into a consumable piece of protein for humans. And so when you break down the problem a little bit like that, you then say, okay, well, how do you, if you're a business owner, how do you increase the productivity of that grass factory, so to speak? And we haven't figured out how to control rain or sunshine yet. I'll leave that to Elon to figure out at some point in the future. But the easiest way, or the current way that people do that as a rancher or dairy farm owner, is they add fencing and add labor to it to put the animals on the grass at the right moment in time, and then take them off it at the right moment in time to not overuse that grass or overeat that grass, so that it can continue its reproductive cycle and create more grass. And the only ways to do that are via fencing and labor. And when you look at the problem space like that, then all of a sudden fencing becomes this actual really interesting tool that hadn't been innovated in for a long time. You've got barbed wire and electric fencing, but each of those are 100 years old. One's 200 and one's 100 years old. And so what our product does is that we put a collar on a cow, and you are able to, via your phone or your computer, to draw a fencing line on a geo map on your computer, and it keeps animals in areas, keeps animals out of areas, and actually enables you to move animals from one place to another. The easiest analog that people kind of have is the fence for their dogs, that where there's a wire in the ground. Ours is, there is no wire in the ground, but it uses that same kind of Pavlovian response where we train that animal that sound and stimulus are married together, and then all of a sudden the cow responds to sound alone. So you can move cows across your property or keep them in areas with just sound.
That's wild, because not obviously, but when I think of moving cattle or any other animal, I'm thinking of like someone on a horse with a lasso, and they're probably
Are they up there for you right now?
I'm like visualizing it, and they're like, I don't know, there's a sheepdog involved. Don't laugh. That is what it is.
If you go to that example of the sheepdog, it's actually an interesting one. Like it's somewhat similar, right? How many cows do you think that sheepdog actually bites? The majority of what they're doing is they're just barking and running around.
Yeah.
And the threat of the bite is what actually motivates the whole herd to move from one place to another. And
yeah.
So you can think of our collars as somewhat similar in the sense that, like, the threat of them getting a stimulus is what motivates the herd to be able to move from one place to another.
So is this like modernizing ranching or cattle ranching, to where these owners are not having to be like on site? Let's say that they need to move cattle, and are they able to do that on their phone or on their computer?
Yeah. So the answer is yes to the second question. They're able to do that on their computer, and they don't necessarily need to be on site. We're pretty kind of adamant that we're not trying to take the cowboy out of the equation, because we actually, if you think about our sensor, it's in our device, it doesn't have the ability to interpret what's going on locally.
Right.
Right. If there's a fire, if the animals aren't having access to water, if the grass state is different than what somebody believes it to be, all of those factors are something that require a human being to be there and to analyze the situation. What we're doing is we're actually just removing what is generally seen as one of the least liked parts of the job. You talk about people and they love what you described. They love getting on the horse and throwing a lasso on an animal, or they love just getting out and riding on a beautiful morning, but they don't like getting off that horse and hammering in fence
Right.
posts for 12 hours, or cranking barbed wire. And the other thing that happens a lot with ranches is like the wire breaks due to snowdrift in the west, or a flooding scenario in the south, or for numerous reasons, and then the cows get out.
Right.
And they get a call because the cows are on the highway, or they get a call because or they just don't know. And so the other thing that it provides is the ability to have certainty of where your herd is, and that they're in that area, and exactly where they are. It saves a lot of time for you to be able to say, oh, instead of going and riding around this 400-acre pasture, I'm going to go directly to the cows, put eyes on them. And then when you're out there, you're actually able to be more productive. You're able to say, oh, this one's got droopy ears, or, this one's pulled away from the herd a little bit. Maybe I should go take another look. The things that we don't think we ever replace, but at the same time give the rancher more time to be able to execute on those and add value, as a human.
Yeah, I think that it opens them up to do more productive things rather than just like, digging holes or, putting up fence. Have you had a lot of pushback from people that you have kind of pitched this to, or are people saying, like, we've been doing this way for 100 years and, we're not going to change?
Yeah, 100's short for some ranch tenants.
Yeah.
Right? We get a lot of people, their family homesteaded, the properties, and there's in the community that we work in, I think that there's a lot of natural, not resistance, but a lot of natural just wariness about things that they can't fix on their own, and that nobody else has implemented. And so I don't think the resistance that we generally see is related to like, hey, it's always been done this way. It's more like, what do I do if the system breaks down? And what happens if, in this scenario that we see? And there's a lot of just kind of making sure that the system has thought through the problem set that they encounter on a yearly basis, more so than like, hey, we're just stuck in our ways. I think that if you go to any typical ranch or general ag scenario, people have to have innovated over the last 100 years just to have survived.
Yeah.
Whether that's anything, combines, etc. It's an innovative environment in general.
Oh, I agree. I mean, they are constantly having to shift depending on what crop they're able to grow. And then also, the quantity and quality of everything. They're constantly looking into new ways of doing things. But, I worked for someone who was in their late 70s, and everything that we did on the computer, it was like, no, you have to print it out. And I'm like, no, but it's saved on the computer, so we're okay. And it's like, no, the computer could crash. I'm like, I know that, but there's like a cloud and it'll be okay. And, we'll survive this. But it was like, no, we had to print everything out. So I feel like that's maybe similar,
I think that's that within the umbrella of our customer base, you certainly see people who have different skill sets as it relates to technology adoption, right? And skittishness about what you're describing there is basically like, what's the backup scenario?
Yes.
Right. And I think that is like such a natural ag reaction to things, because it's like, oh, we need to have 3 backup plans because we might have drought, we might have flood, we might have fires, we might, there's just kind of this litany of what Mother Nature could do to any property in ag. And so they just need to constantly be thinking of like all of the ways that things can break down and all of the risks associated with things. And, we get the one nice thing about kind of, I would say, the way that our country already has set things up is that most properties are already fenced in largely from like the perimeter fencing of properties. And, the quality of that fencing, could be deteriorated or not, but the main productivity gain of our product is actually the subdivision of interior fencing. And so, if everything went to hell in a handbag, the system's just not working at all, it's not like they're going to be any worse off than they were before. The cows will still be potentially within their perimeter fences, assuming their perimeter fences are okay. So that, I think, alleviates some of that kind of really existential anxiety related to the product. It's more about like, okay, how productive am I getting a lot of bang for my buck from this product? Mm-hmm. Is it doing everything that you're saying that it should do to help me make gains on my property?
Well, I have some friends that have a ranch, and I did not know that you had to move these animals, and I did not know that you had to put up new fence, and that you do that often enough. But they have to hire these people in order to do that because they're too busy themselves.
Day workers.
What's that?
Day workers.
Yeah. Like a farmhand. Yep.
Yeah.
And I would think that your business, your program, would possibly help them with that expense of having to constantly be hiring, because I think it is a high turnover area from my understanding. I would think that would be really helpful for these owners in order to be able to kind of do it themselves.
It's not just high turnover, it's also, the quality of high turnover work is often frustratingly challenging.
Yeah.
Because it's moving on to the next shiny object, theoretically. You go to some big ranches in the West or, in Texas, and, they've got staff that have been there for 20 years.
Right.
And, know the property inside and out better than the owners in many cases. And so, I think it's as you get smaller down where you don't have a piece of property that is generating enough income to sustain a family, and it's kind of supplemental income, what's coming off of the ranch, that is a point where we find kind of an interesting market dynamic. The product has different values for each user, candidly. It's really interesting when we talk to people, like they're like, well, what's your exact ROI for this? And then we're like, well, first you got to tell us about your ranch. Is it in Florida or is it in Texas? Is it 1,000 acres or is it 200,000 acres? These are just different dynamics occur in properties that are neighbors, and the value add is really always ranch specific. There are some big buckets which things fit in, but it really does change. It's amazing to me how it can change from one neighbor to the next, almost kind of inverted in which bucket people use things for.
And you said that you've been at this now for 8 years.
Yep.
And so, I mean, when you're going, are you like cold calling these ranchers, or are you guys kind of like word of mouth, or how are you capturing, your demographic?
So, for the first, let's call it 6.5, 7 years, we were all actually inbound. So it was kind of, people heard about what we were doing, and we had a lot more demand than we had supply of devices. Last year, we joined the Merck Animal Health team, and now we've got a much more formal kind of sales engine that we're tuning up, I guess, is how I would describe it. And we've got a commercial lead who's been with Merck Animal Health for 20 plus years and knows the ins and outs of how to sell to this industry, 5,000 times better than I would even dream about being able to do. So, we're really kind of turning that corner of, being, I would say, niche enough that we constantly have more demand than we were able to supply, to now being able to say, okay, well, we're about to be able to supply a lot more given the size of the company. Let's, really turn up all the screws on the sales efforts, and that'll happen here in the next year and a half too. And it's exciting. It's really interesting to
Yeah.
kind of learn about. It's a different phase.
No, I think that's incredible. I mean, obviously that's a good position to be in to, have more demand than, you're able to like produce, especially during those first couple of years. And I think it's also encouraging to know that landowners are open to this sort of technology, and I would say even like progress in ranching, because I know that it can be hard for people who that is their whole life. That's been their dad's life, their grandpa's life. And I know that it's hard, for people to kind of not let go, but just shift and change. But I think,
it's a risk.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And most of us have our job, and that sits in one corner, and another quadrant of our life is our work. We have our job here, we have our friends here, we have our family, and maybe we have our religion and church over here, and those are the four kind of quadrants of life. And when you look at some of these communities which we work in, kind of they all are connected. It's like one big circle in the middle, and it touches all of them. And making change in that area is really high risk. And yet I think that what we find is that people are, as you have the generation which is, largely the kind of owners of these ranches in general are in this kind of 50 plus, getting closer to 60, 70, it's hard work.
Yeah.
And when they look to a younger generation to pass it down, some of them are like, well, I don't know that that's the hard work that I want.
Yeah. Well, and because I think that the newer, the younger generations, it's always like, let's work smarter, not harder.
And so I think that like has some appeal for them of saying like, hey, I can get my next generation really interested in doing this, because I'm going to strip out these parts of the job that nobody likes, and get them to the things that I love about it, which are as I said, you're kind of out there riding, you're in nature, you're with the animals, and like the things that are really romantic about being a cowboy aren't going to change. Hopefully we're taking away some of the drudgery of that job.
Yeah, for sure. Do you get a lot of, I don't know if they call them property managers on ranches.
Ranch manager.
Yeah,
Ranch manager.
Do you get a lot of inquiries from them being like, I'm burnt, like I have to change this. Yeah, I'm burnt out. And you know, they're really interested in your product, or is it mostly the owners?
You know, it's a mix. I think that like there has been this move towards and like I think conservation is how I would describe it, but it's like conservation has multiple legs of benefits for the ranch, right? It's like, you know, if you start treating your land better, you're going to have better productivity on your grass, which means that you could carry more cattle, which means that you're going to have more birds, and you're going to have, you know, be able to carry more cattle. And it has this just kind of generative value. And so whether it's the ranch manager or the owner, they both a lot of times will come to us from this angle of like, I'm really thinking about doing this. Can you help me? Because I don't want to spend X amount of energy and X amount of dollars trying to do this. And I don't necessarily have the resources from even a manpower perspective to add this on to the list of things we already have. And as soon as we start going down that kind of pathway with them, those two parties are, the ranch manager is always kind of looking up to the owner of the property, if there is a ranch manager, and saying, hey, this is going to cost us X this year. Are you on board for that? And so what ends up making that conversation nicer is sometimes they're going, that project I've been talking about for a while, well, we could do it with virtual fencing, and it's only going to cost Y. And I know I was telling you that it was going to cost 2X that or 3X that. Here's what we could do, and here are the benefits. And it makes it kind of a little bit more palatable to experiment with things on the ranch, right? You're not putting in $100,000 of fencing that, if you're wrong, has to be ripped out. It's like, oh, let's section off this area and let's do this year. If that didn't work out so well, great. Next year we're just drawing different lines on the computer, or even mid-year we can change it up. And it allows adaptation to occur in a way that physical fencing just really can't replicate. So I think that when you take it in the broader lens of everybody looking at kind of, call it climate change and its effects on lands, and saying, look, we're seeing more droughts, we're seeing more floods. We don't know what we need one year to the next. We need to be able to have a tool that allows us to flex up, flex down, flex sideways. The tool ends up helping them a lot in those scenarios. So we get the inquiries from I would say both parties.
And then, so what happens? So, let's say that an owner or a manager, they've decided to go with Vence. What are the steps, after that? I mean, I know you're using geo maps, and, how are you guys, walk us through that?
Yeah, so let's just say you two come with your ranch, and you're wanting to be kind of a customer. We have a kind of standard intake form, I would say, from our team, of understanding how many head you have, what your goals are. Again, it does end up being goal driven, because if you're wanting to move your cows every day, it's different than if you're wanting to move your cows every week versus every 2 weeks. And the level of infrastructure that we need from a communication systems side just changes based a little bit on what your needs are as a customer. But that all being said, you come to us, you tell us what your herd looks like and what your goals are, and what your ranch looks like, and we come back to you and say, okay, we will need to put up 2 towers, and call them towers, call them base stations. These are 20 feet tall huts. They've got a little hut at the bottom and an antenna that goes up about 20 feet, and they create a AM radio station, or the equivalent of an AM radio station, over your ranch. And then after that, we will ship you the collars. So you can either have us help you set up the base stations, or you can do that yourself, and we'll ship the collars, and you put the collars on the animals. And then we have a team that's really kind of, I would say, the selling of the product is the easy part. The real work ends up happening of like, how do we get you to adopt this and get productivity
the
out of it?
implementation of it.
Yeah, the implementation. And so that, our customer success team, the sales team will hand it off to the customer success team, and that customer success team, works extremely diligently with, the ranchers to set up a plan and set up their ranch and really kind of troubleshoot any problems they have. They've got kind of weekly calls that everybody can dial in. So we have these calls on certain nights where you'll have 20, 30 ranchers from all over the country dialing in to say, oh, well, I'm using it for this. How are you doing this? And
so it's like a lot of collaboration between your clients.
We're trying to have best practices really kind of come out from ranchers, because we don't necessarily we're not always the ones who know how it's best used, because these guys are out there experimenting. Oh, maybe I can do this. Maybe I can use the product to work in this fashion. And so there's one-on-one work, but there's also work that the ranching community kind of helps each other figure out the best ways to do it as well.
That's incredible. And so whenever you're putting these collars on cattle or, whatever it may be,
children.
Oh, how do they, so they have this, stimulation, but how do they know to not go past that?
Yeah. So the way that the cows are trained, so we've got the onboarding of the customers, and we kind of have the onboarding of the cows.
Yeah.
So there's like a 72-hour period of time in which we've got ways that we train the cow to learn that sound is a predecessor to stimulus. And so that's the way that sound is. It's not just that there's like a line that exists across your property. There's actually like multiple layers of lines, and there's like buffer zones. Exactly. And so as they walk into the sound zone, they start to hear that sound, and they're like, oh, first time they hear it, they're like, that's odd. There's some they're playing country music here. I don't know what's going on. But eventually they will experience a stimulus as they keep walking forward, and then they're going, oh, sound and stimulus are married. And really short order, that
yes,
happens to them, and they're like, oh, okay, when I hear that sound, I'm going the other way.
Okay.
Like full stop. And that happens, as I said, in 72 hours. And the interesting thing that'll happen is, in a herd, you'll have, over time, just like in society, you've got your people who are always testing the boundaries, and then you got your other people who are just like keeping an eye on those folks who are testing boundaries out there, and they're like, looks like Jimmy got shocked out there. I'm going back this way, and that seems like a bad deal. And Jimmy continues to go out, and we'll test the line a couple times.
Actually, you know what? One of our coworkers here, Bridget, her dog is clicker trained. And I feel like that's a lot like that. Like as soon as she hears that clicker, she's on place like that. It's like straight to jail. So
yeah, no, it's like, some people learn that, and other people are like, oh, I'm going to test that jail line, a lot of times, and some of them end up in it and some of them skirt it. But
yeah. Boundaries for everyone, I guess. But that's really a cool thing. I can't believe it only takes 72 hours. And do the ranchers have to be out there with them during this 72 hours, or just kind of put the collars on and it just kind of goes to work?
Kind of put them into a confined area, and we basically create artificial boundaries within that to kind of force the animals to encounter the sound, force the animals to encounter stimulus. And so then, after that period of time, they're like, okay, we've experienced that. We know that these things are married. That's and the rancher doesn't really have to do anything as it relates to kind of being out with them during that period of time.
So is Vence the future of ranch management?
We certainly think so. That's what we've been betting on. But I think that it's a tool. I always like to say, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. and so, you got to be careful about, how you use tools and when it's the right tool and when it's not. And that's one of the things we, as a team, spend time on in terms of like looking at customers. Like, is this the right customer for us? Or are they looking for some tool that's not really what we do? And and it's going to create stress for them, stress for us, and stress for the animals. Like that's bad all around business. And so we think it serves a really nice spot in the toolbox of the future of ranch management. We're certainly excited about it, but I think that it's one amongst many tools.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it sounds so much better than physically putting up fence.
Yeah, you should YouTube some like fence building videos. Like you look at it,
my dad, when my parents were built, I grew up on 5 acres, but my dad like fenced in the whole property, and he, God knows why, but he would make my brother and I sit in the truck, while he's like digging these like post holes. And I was I'm probably like 6, and I was like, I will never forgive you for what you've done. Like it was,
look at my hands, they're bloody.
I know.
You're sitting in the car playing with your toys.
I know. And I'm just like, this has got to be the worst day of my life.
It's got to be so much more applicable out west. Like I went out to Colorado on a hunting trip this past September, and we'd come up to somebody's property boundary, and they have these T-posts driven into the ground. I'm like, that's driven into straight rock. Like, I don't want to know how they got a fence post into this for miles.
Yeah.
And
it's insane what it costs to put fencing in Colorado. Like, for like some forest services and BLM lands out there, they get quoted between $25,000 and $50,000 a mile of fencing.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, is Vence saving money, by not having to buy fencing products, obviously, the labor that it would take. So in the long run, are you guys cheaper than?
That's our, like, we have to be.
Yeah.
We don't have a business. So yeah, no, and we think that it, like, it serves it. A fence is also, it's a tool, but it's kind of a dumb tool that it gives you no information back. Whereas, we can fence the animals in and say like, hey, they were only in this area for 3 days. And I can give you a heat map of like exactly where they put pressure on the land. And, they never came over here. Or, this is their path that they travel from one place to another. And so really, when we think about it, it's a land management tool over time where we're saying, how do you use that landscape better, and how is it being used currently? How do we save money doing that?
That's incredible. That's very, very cool. Well, have you had any major?
I've got so many questions.
I was going to say, have you had any major breakouts? These like rogue cattle just totally busting through the.
No, I'll use the same societal kind of analog. Like, there's like 2% of society which just doesn't follow rules, and like cattle wise, you've got like a pretty similar number where it's just like you've got your crazy cows and
mad cow.
Like, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, Chad.
Oh, I've got 10,000 questions. Like, I wanted to know specifically, like, is there a break even somewhere when somebody's like, I've got 20,000 head of cattle, or 100,000 head of cattle, or you mentioned BLM land. That was another thing. Like,
What is BLM land? Because I know.
Bureau of Land Management.
Okay.
So it's basically public land, obvious restrictions in different areas, but a lot of people will free range their cattle
Oh gosh.
on
Okay.
BLM land. So I'm wondering if, like, is there a world where the BLM would come in and say, hey, we're going to have so many head of cattle on this, and they've got to be moved to feedlots. Like, does BLM get involved there? Do the owners of the cattle get involved there? How do the units go up?
We spend a lot of time. So, I mean, two separate questions. One's kind of the break even side of things. And again, let me just give you kind of an example where you're like, you've got your ranch and you've got 1,000 head of cattle on it, and there's like no internal infrastructure. And your neighbor's got a ranch and he's got, 1,500 head of cattle on it, and he's got a ton of internal infrastructure. Like, the ROI for the guy who has no infrastructure is a lot higher because he hasn't already made the investment. And so he can get the uptick really quickly in terms of like the productivity gains. It doesn't mean the neighbor isn't going to have an ROI. It just changes because he's already spent the money to subdivide, and he's already gone from 1,000 to 1,500 head of cattle. So he's already kind of generating more from his landscape. And that break even. So we currently are, only selling the product to ranches that are 200 plus head of cattle. And the reason for that is a little bit of, this, like, how much does a tower cost? How big of a property, can you manage 200 animals on? And like what the return basis looks like. And we feel like in that market and up, there's a lot of returns that we generate for our customer base, and they vary just based on kind of what their needs are. On the government side, we've had really good fortune that, like, a lot of these agencies are, really focused on, outcomes. And whether it's Forest Services, Bureau of Land Management, NRCS, we're in kind of deep dialogue with all of these agencies about, utilizing our product on government lands to help create better outcomes for grazing. And when you look at the U.S., the single largest land manager is the U.S. government, right? They've got 400 plus million acres of land that are like grazed for cattle. And all of those generally are in some sort of lease format where they'll say, hey, Chad, you've got your lease on this, 15,000 acres of forest land in Oregon. And you have to put X number of cattle on it, but if there's a fire, you've got to get them out, you've got to do X, Y, and Z. And they're just stipulations. It's a contract. And tension arises between you and them because there's no way to necessarily track your behavior and track your management of it, other than if somebody physically goes out there and is like, hey, I saw you've only got 3 head of cattle out there as far as I can see, and like they're all in this area where we told you they shouldn't be. And you're going, well, those aren't my cattle, those are so-and-so's cattle that broke out. It creates this lack of I would say transparency, and so one of the areas where we think that there's really interesting intersection of value for us is that we can not just create outcomes in terms of saying keep animals out of this, spawning stream for this steelhead trout that we're trying to protect, or this sage grouse, or this, and we can show that cattle weren't in that area, so there's no question about it. But we can also report that, right? And so suddenly you have this objective piece of information where you could say, we can certify this outcome differently, and so that's I think where we're seeing interest, and then also there's just a lot of push towards better management of those government lands. We as citizens all are owners of that land, and so people are pushing for them to be managed better.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think that we've kept you way over 30 minutes at this point.
Has it been?
But I feel like
Apologies for rambling.
no. I've certainly
I could stay here for another 30 minutes or hour.
I know. It's really interesting, the work that you guys, that Vence is doing. And certainly, if you really learn something new every day. One of our marketing staff came in here and she was like, oh, who's going to be on the podcast? And I was like, a virtual fencing company. And she was like, well, you really do, like, every day is like a gift. I was like, I know. But it is important for, especially our clients, to know kind of what's out there and what's available to them, and what the present and future of cattle ranching looks like.
Yeah, Eli, you can close that tab on my screen back there that's fencing when I was trying to learn sword fighting. So close that tab. We're good to go now.
But Frank, we really appreciate you coming on today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Great luck with the birthday party tomorrow. Is it a cattle theme?
We've got like little tennis balls and tennis ball pinata. So.
Nice. I was going to say, if you need to keep count of all the children, you can use your
Give them
Vence.
some necklaces.
Yeah.
My wife's much more inclined to have it on me than our children. Yeah.
I think I can understand. So, okay. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing your product on hopefully some of our listings soon.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all.
Appreciate you.